welcome you to Vote for the Greater Good. We're so excited to have you with us for the launch of this campaign. As we all know, this and all elections are critical elections, but we're living in such an urgent moment, which is why we need to make sure everybody has the access they need to go out, get to the polls, make their civic voices heard now more than ever. To give you a bit of an introduction as to who we are, my name is Tarina Ahuja.
My name is Adam Ashley, and we are the co-founders of the Greater Good Initiative.
The Greater Good Initiative is a youth-led, youth-run policy think tank. We started on a FaceTime call at 3 a.m. discussing how we can get young people involved in the policy-making process. And with that came our organization. Adam, do you want to go into a bit more about what we do?
Sorry, I'm just setting up the live stream right now. We're going to be going live on Facebook right now. So thank you guys for dealing with us for a second. The Greater Good Initiative is a youth-led policy think tank. So we write and lobby policy to legislators at all levels of government. Our goal is to create bipartisan policy proposals that can garner support from both sides of the aisle. When we started the organization, we were Northern Virginia based. We had some people from other parts of the country. We had about 15 people involved, and we now have over 80 people involved in GGI from across the United States, which is phenomenal. We're making great strides in terms of our policy work as well as the advocacy work that we're doing in contacting legislators. And we are so glad you guys are joining us for the Vote for the Greater Good kickoff event. The Vote for the Greater Good is our youth voter registration campaign. Mike Whaley, who's one of our education policy fellows, he's helped take the lead on planning this event. So we are super grateful for him. We're going to pass it over to him to talk a little bit more about the Vote for the Greater Good campaign.
Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Adam and Tarina. First off, I just wanted to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to our campaign. We are so glad that you all could take time out of your busy days to make it today. So I'm sure you're wondering, what exactly is Vote for the Greater Good? It's simple. This is a campaign that is devoted to making sure people know why it's important to vote, how they can get registered to vote, and what some of the biggest issues facing our nation are, so that they can enter their polls and go out and make their voices heard. It's important now more than ever for the youth, important specifically, to get their voices heard and to make themselves known in our local, state, and federal levels of government. And we at the Greater Good Initiative believe that it is our duty to make sure everyone is heard, represented, and known. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Arthur Lieber, who is the director at Civitas Associates. We also have Kalkar, who is an innovation director for 18 by Vote, and we have Sydney Stewart, who's a civic engagement fellow for 18 by Vote.
Awesome, and you are going to hear more from our panelists in just a little bit. And before we go start with that, we are going to start with a quick little poll. It's going to show up on your screen. We just have a question for you guys. How are you feeling about voting? Are you feeling good? Excited? Are you feeling great about it? Or do you have questions? Are you nervous, confused, unsure? Both are completely valid. So go ahead and just fill out that poll if you get a chance.
Absolutely. We have
57%
voter turnout. Let's see if for this poll we get 100%. I think we can. Awesome. 70% voter turnout. Okay. We'll wait for everybody to get their votes in. But yeah, so okay, almost there. We'll wait like a couple more seconds, but it's such a weird time right now. So whether it is nervous and confused or whether it's really excited, for some of us, it might be our first time voting. For others, it might be our 15th time voting. And both are equally as important. Adam, do you want to go ahead and share the results now? We had 75% voter turnout, so hopefully in the election we can do better than that.
So most people are feeling good. Most people are feeling excited. Whether that's that you're registered, you've requested your ballot in the mail, or you're ready to show up to the polls in a safe way. And we have some people that are nervous or confused, and that is totally fine. That is exactly what this panel is for. Like we said earlier, this whole panel is dedicated to the importance of the youth vote and why it's important to get registered, why it's important to cast your ballot. And we are super excited to hear from our panelists and foster a little bit of discussion. And then right after that, we're going to have an opportunity for you guys to turn on your cameras and sort of join into the conversation. Any questions that you may have about registering to vote, any questions you might have about why it's important to vote, why should you vote. That's all what today is about. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Tarina, do you have anything to add?
Yes, really quickly, before we start our official panel, I wanted to pose a question to everybody here. And so if you want to answer, go ahead and raise your hand. You can take yourself off of camera, but also feel free to just put it in the chat. But my question to you is, why do you think voting is important? So feel free to raise your hand to put it in the chat to anybody. Well, wait a second. And if
you don't know how to raise your hand, you press participants and then press raise hand. Or you can click on that chat button at the bottom and drop something into the chat.
Yeah, okay. We have a preview to one of our panelists. You want to go ahead, Arthur? Arthur, did you want to?
Pardon?
Oh, never mind. Okay, never mind.
Sorry.
William. Anyone? Okay, I guess. Oh, yeah, William, go ahead.
Okay. Good. I think the reason why it's important to vote is that it's basically our civic duty to vote. And a lot of people may think that voting doesn't matter and doesn't benefit the country, but what I'm basically trying to say is, since I can't vote, I can at least just still be informed, read up on issues, get out and talk, share my opinion on social media, volunteer and work on a campaign. And I'm pretty sure an example of the reason why to vote is George Bush versus Al Gore. George Bush only won by 537 votes. And if 600 people voted for Al Gore, we would have had a completely different president. I was saying voter turnout is extremely important. And me being a Democrat, I really think that we should be looking to not forget about the Trump base, just the white, blue-collar workers that are struggling to find a job. And I just think we really need to pull in as many votes as possible. That's just
absolutely. No, that's a great response. We have some other responses in the chat. We had some people saying it's the best and easiest way to have your voice heard. It's significant for the youth to vote because policies and bills will affect us in the long term, which is absolutely true. Everything that's going into legislation now is going to have long-term effects for our generation. It's one of the most basic forms of participating in American government. It's the first way for us to let our voices be heard. It's a way to make the change that you want to see for the next generation. People work hard for us to have the right as well. It's not fair to complain about problems in politics if we're not willing to vote and participate. That's absolutely true. And also, it's the basic fundamental right and duty of any eligible individual in a democracy. It must be absolutely free and safe for any American adult with no pointless impediments.
And that's an incredible point, thinking about how we have to make sure that everybody has access to get out to the polls.
Yeah.
And so I love all of the energy in the chat. I want to pass it to my good friend Kimani, who wanted to answer something as well. So all you, Kimani.
Oh, hello, everyone. So I think voting is important because the essence of our democracy is one in which the people willingly relinquish their consent to be governed. And Thomas Jefferson coined it as such, that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So voting is our way of giving our consent. So I feel that it's of paramount importance that we go out on November 3rd or early voting to give our consent, to say we give our permission for you to represent us. We give you permission to be our voice. So I think that is of paramount importance. And if you don't vote, you're not giving your consent, and therefore you have no political representation in the government.
Absolutely. Wow, what strong words, and how beautifully said that was.
We have Ike with, we're gonna take one more person to go ahead and speak on this. Ike, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
I think voting is important because you're not only just voting for candidates, you're voting for like a variety of issues in like offices, I believe. Currently, there's a Supreme Court vacancy, and so your vote matters. Who will be on the who will fill that seat in the future, and as well, you're not just voting for candidates. You're also voting for like ballot measures or like referendums or the people have the ability to make the laws that shape our world, basically. Like in several states right now, there's referendums to decide whether um, the state should switch to a different voting system to make it like much better for the people, make it more proportional to the actual national the actual
The percentages
make
on
more
the representation
yeah
in this country, right?
yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah. So these issues, I think people don't like. Just vote, please. Just vote, because I feel like people don't understand the power you have with just one mark on a paper or one push of a button. You have an ability to shape the future, basically.
Absolutely.
That was incredibly said. That and very true. It's this idea that we do have the ability to shape the future, and we have to use that ability to make sure that everybody's voices are heard, because we know that voter suppression is very real in this country. So it's really about making sure that that equity is there so that we can decide our future and quite literally vote for the greater good of our communities. And so, yes, as Kimani just said, just vote. And it hashtag just vote going off of Nike. And so I think that is an incredible idea, your advertising mind. So on that note, we're going to start talking with our incredible panelists about why voting is important nationally, but also why it's important at the local level for your city council members, for your state legislators. And like Ike wonderfully said, talking about why it's important to make sure that we vote for referendums, because we quite literally can choose what happens. So I'm going to pass it over to our wonderful Greater Good Initiative fellow, Mike Whaley.
Thanks, Tarina. Okay, so first off, this is a question just for all the panelists. Whoever wants to answer this can chime in. In your opinion, why is it important for young people to vote?
Well, I'm happy to go first. I'm Arthur in St. Louis. And, there is the reason that I think is most frequently given, which is that if you don't vote, then you're forfeiting your right to be part of the decision-making in the country. And other people are going to vote and may kind of, I think what William was saying before meant so much in what happened in the year 2000 and less than 600 voters in Florida. Who essentially dictated that George W. Bush won rather than Al Gore. Here's another reason. It's one that I've been thinking about more recently. And that is, if we look at the election in 2016, and we look at the number of people who had voted for Barack Obama and then either voted for Donald Trump or sat out, to me, in a sense, it was really a diss to Barack Obama. I think that one of the things we should do in voting is to show appreciation for those people who have been outstanding leaders, outstanding representatives. And even if Hillary Clinton wasn't your favorite candidate in 2016, it's a shame that Barack Obama has had to experience all the insults, all the shame that comes from what has succeeded him. So, I think part of what we want to do is to show appreciation for those who are really good. One last thing I would say, and I think it was said just before by one of the other gentlemen, that structurally we need to make so many significant changes in terms of becoming more democratic. Obviously, the Electoral College is not democratic. Gerrymandering is not. The way in which one senator, Mitch McConnell, can essentially talk for 52 other people in his party is not democratic. So I think getting engaged in voting, and one of the key things right now is to try to deal with these structural inequities that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Would any of our other panelists like to chime in on this question?
Yeah, I can definitely say something about like how important it is, especially for young people like me, to get out and vote, because I know I've heard before, like from my peers, oh, voting doesn't matter. And I think a lot of us don't know that we can vote on a local level. Like personally, I just now learned about like voting on a local level and seeing how much effect that has within my community, and just focusing on the presidential. It shouldn't be like just our main focus, but realize that the local voting is more important than like the presidential. Even though that is very important, the locals happen more often. And I think it's very also important for us to like educate ourselves and know that voting is a privilege to have, because a lot of people don't have the option to vote. Like people who are incarcerated and everything, they lose their right to vote and don't get it back. And us being able to possibly vote people in who want to restore incarcerated people's voting privileges back is like a way to show how important voting is and how much of a say that we get to have. And then also just I think voting is a great way to get engaged civically, like your first step to getting involved, because with voting comes like learning about the issues that are important to you, and then wanting to vote people in or vote on issues that are going to affect whatever community you care about.
Those are both great points. So our next question is one for Uma. So I know that 18 by Vote focuses on empowering youth voters through education. Could you please discuss a bit about the history of youth voting?
Absolutely. And I first just wanted to say thank you all for attending, and for, Tarina and Ada for having me here today. So I think that what's really important to think about when it comes to all of these get out the vote efforts and registration efforts is, what is voting, in the sense of what does it mean in our historical context? Who had the popular vote and who had the electoral college vote stems from a deeper discussion about who were the people who were at the beginning of the United States' inception allowed to vote. And if you really think about it, it was mostly men, it was all men, it was mostly Caucasian men, and it was people who were very rich. And that really leaves out a lot of our population. Women, people of color, other minorities, immigrants, they're not included in that. And we see over the years, there has been an increase in voting rights being expanded across different races, across genders, across, socioeconomic lines. The poll taxes were banned in 1964. The Voting Rights Act was enacted in 1965. But if you think about the youth vote, young people, 18 years old, were only given the right to vote in 1971. That's not really too long ago. And in fact, it took, we were the last group of people who were given the right to vote. So you have to think about how young people have been treated by the voting system and how long it's taken for us to get a voice. And when you see posts about, oh, the youth just don't turn out to vote, they're not very, active in voting, maybe they just don't care, there's a deeper history to that. So when it comes to the youth vote, you really have to understand that what your position is as a young voter is one that stems from a history of standing on the shoulders of giants and fighting for your rights, and really opening up this idea that young people have a voice and that voice matters, and that should be exercised at the polls. And I believe it was Kimani who said it so eloquently, voting is the consent that you're giving to have a certain person represent you. And this is also important for young people who, you don't have to be directly connected to your local governments or have a direct, my job is involved in the government or something like that, because all of these like, choices and situations around you that you're seeing, they do affect you. And so at 18by.vote, what we really focus on is getting these young people who've historically been disenfranchised and making sure that they're empowered for the 2020 election, but also for the elections to come. Because if you can start voting just as you turn 18, there's more likely of a chance that you're going to keep voting as you get older and older.
Thank you for that. Those were really well said points. And I particularly aligned with your point about empowering people to vote. And once they start voting at 18, they're more likely to keep doing it and doing it. So next, I want to bring it over to Arthur. So you have been published multiple times, and your most recent one was discussing the Democrat and Republican divide going into this year's election. Could you please talk about that a little bit, as well as talk about how important it is to have educated and informed young voters?
Well, I think that the key question is having educated voters. And if we look at the 2016 election, we had 40% of those who were eligible to vote who didn't vote. That's like the combined population of the 11 largest metropolitan areas in the country. So why did these people not vote? And I think a big part of it is, especially since so many of them were young, is that either intentionally or unintentionally, our schools are in many ways providing disincentives for young people to vote. And I say that because schools are so concerned about each person doing everything he or she can for him or herself, or trying to advance the school community. But there's very little sense of the common good, the greater good. That is somewhat counter. If you are looking outside the bubble of your school, then in some ways, I think in the minds of school administrators, superintendents, whatever, you're going into forbidden territory. What you should be doing is doing what's best for your school. And I'd love to hear other people's response to that. And because you're looking at things in that myopic view, you're not looking in terms of the greater good. It might be, what's best for the people who go to the school that's your primary rival. It might be what's good for people who are of a different ethnicity from you. It might be people from a different country. I don't think we really try to promote that. So I think this is why, in my mind, the greater good initiative is so important, because I think you have to work outside of the educational system that we have in this country. You need to provide ways for students to learn about civics in ways that are counter to schools where so much is really forbidden to talk about. So kudos to Greater Good Initiative from me.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's honestly also a really important point. I do think that our schools have this narrow-minded focus on how can our students be involved here, but they don't pay attention to how they can really be involved in the greater good and can be involved in the good of not just their community, but like the greater human community. I think that's actually something really insightful and something our schools need to do a better job at teaching kids about. So I'm going to pass it over to Adam and Tarina to talk about how GGI is doing work that's preparing Gen Z to become excited about voting politics as a whole, and how they think that their work is something that is really essential and important for our generation.
Absolutely. So as everyone knows from our little bit of introduction, if you are unfamiliar with GGI, a big part of our organization is writing bipartisan policy proposals and lobbying them to legislators. So our policy work is very important to us and our advocacy work is very important to us. But beyond that, a lot of young people come to our organization or email us or reach out to us on social media and say that they want to get involved, but they do not, they're not experts on policy. They're not experts on politics. And we say, great, come and join us. There's very few people our age that have experience with writing policy, and that's a big part of our organization, is educating young people. And through the policy, through the research that our fellows are doing for both policy and advocacy in creating our policy proposals, they are becoming more educated individuals and preparing to go out into the world and cast their vote as an informed voter.
Yeah, off of that point, I think what's really interesting to remember and think about is that, you know, oftentimes there's this paradigm that young people are the future, right? But we're not the future, we're the present, we're the right now. We've seen how young people, how Gen Z has taken this ability to mobilize, to take our ideas and turn it into action. And I think that's just so special to think about how young people have that civic superpower. And so I think the reason why, in looking at the lens of youth voting is one, making sure that, you know, 18-year-olds and up are voting, are physically getting out to the polls, but also making sure that young people who may not be 18 yet have access to make their voices heard, whether it be doing things like this, whether it be making sure that other people know how to vote. For example, Mike, one of our GGI fellows, one of our most incredible fellows, is actually not of voting age yet, but look at all he's doing to make sure that other people have access to voting. And so I think that's what's so special about GGI. When we do policy work, it's empowering other young people to say, I don't have to wait till I have a master's. I don't have to wait till I go to graduate school. I can start writing policy right now. I can encourage other people to start voting right now. That civic superpower, it starts right now.
See, I love that one, civic superpower. That's actually a really cool phrase. And that kind of is a nice little transition into my next question, which is kind of going to be a whole group one. We all feel the need for your younger generation to have this civic superpower and have this sense of wanting to vote and needing to vote, but there are a lot of obstacles out there that are preventing them from doing so. So in your opinion, I'd like each panelist to answer this one. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest obstacles to getting these young people excited to vote and getting them registered to vote? We can start with Arthur.
Well, I think a primary obstacle, as I had said before, is that schools really do not seem to promote the idea of civic engagement. And you reach a certain age, and if you haven't really thought about the greater good, then it's less likely that you're going to do that. I think in many areas where voting is difficult, it's obviously an obstacle. Voter suppression, if you don't have early voting, if you don't have mail-in voting, all of those structural problems make it more difficult. So I think that the reform that's needed is comprehensive. In my mind, it fits in two areas. One is education, and the other is structurally really breaking up all those obstacles to democracy.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of that, I think that on top of this issue that we see in schools, and definitely Arthur's right, like it's not a main focus, civics is not really something that's given a lot of attention, but even when, there's this idea like, oh, young people they don't really care about voting, like they're too disillusioned, they're too like cynical, they're not gonna go out to vote. But what we're seeing, especially with Gen Z in this upcoming election, is that young people want to mobilize. We're seeing it through social justice protests, and we're seeing it through these efforts like the GGI, like we're seeing it through all of these youth-driven efforts. The issue, though, becomes that young people are more likely to get derailed by the obstacles that you can face to vote. So, for instance, how do I get an absentee ballot? Oh, I have to register to vote. When do I have to do that? Why do I have to register to vote before I actually vote? Where's my polling place? My polling place got moved. Now what do I do? These situations are more likely to kind of stop young people from actually getting to the polls or sending out their ballot than it is to, affect older voters who've most likely done it before. So it also turns out that voting in itself is not made in a way that's young people friendly. And there needs to be a larger conversation about how we can change that and how we can simplify it to make it accessible for all members of our voting population.
I absolutely agree. And I wanted to say that when I think of, being a student, when I think of being in high school, whenever they would come to try to get people to register to vote, it was always people that were older than high school students. And it wasn't the high school students leading that charge or the college students leading that charge. And I think that that's something that we really need to see, because the only people that can really encourage young people to register to vote and get out to the polls are other young people. And I think that that is truthfully the biggest obstacle, because it can be something that is hard to understand, hard to figure out. You know, how do I register to vote? How do I request an absentee ballot if I'm here in Virginia, but I live in Texas and I want to vote in the Texas election? How do I figure that out? And that information is sometimes hard and frustrating and confusing. And I think that these things are what are prohibiting young people from registering to vote or getting out to the polls or submitting a ballot, because they see an older generation that's sort of leading this charge rather than people their age and people that look like them leading the charge. And I think that that could potentially be one of the biggest obstacles.
And I think one more thing to add is that there are a lot of nuances. We also have to understand the context of our time right now. We're living in a global pandemic, and we're also living through a revolution for racial justice. And I think a lot of these factors play into kind of this push-pull, where some young people are so driven now to make sure that they're voting and making sure everyone around them is voting. But some are pulled away because it's almost this confusion, this nervousness, this anxiety. And that anxiety is completely valid. It's just a matter of how we call people in, how we reach out to them, and how we make sure that we're all kind of saying, okay, there are these obstacles in front of us. There are these things that make us, confused, make us anxious, but understanding that, one, those feelings are valid, those fears are valid, and two, there is still something we can do about it. Like, for example, there's movements across the country to make sure that young people can be poll workers as early as 16 and 17, because right now the majority of poll workers are actually in much older generations, which right now is risky because of the pandemic. And so just if we can make those opportunities for young people to get involved at a very young age, even if they can't physically cast a ballot, we'll be able to start overcoming some of these hurdles as we encourage each other. We go off of that empathy for that other person's experience and say, hey, I see where you're from. I see your perspective, but let's channel our energy together. We don't have to disagree. We don't have to agree on who we're voting for. We don't have to agree on issues, but we need to channel our collective energy for the greater good.
I really agree with that. Ways in which we can get younger people engaged in the process itself. I want to say two other things about schools. One is schools, because they want to exist, they don't like conflict. And for that reason, there are many schools which will not even permit conversation of current issues, of political issues. And so you have people growing up and not even being engaged in the issues that are here and now. I think the other thing is that schools, so many schools are not democratic at all. There are not many decisions within schools that are made in a democratic way. And so in many ways, students don't feel, I have a role, I have a right to have a say in what's going on. If you reach age 18 and you kind of, never thought about having a vote and being a participant, then I think, an outcome of that can be that you just won't care about having that right as you get older.
Yeah, and I would just like to say that being at school, and going back to what everyone is saying, that if my school taught about voting rights and the importance of voting, I feel like everyone's perspective would have been so much different and would have been better. And I think also younger people may see voting as hard work or a type of work that they don't want to do, or extra work, when it really isn't. And if we knew about the importance and how easy it really is, then I don't think we would see it as work anymore, or people wouldn't describe it as it being such a, just a tasking deal that's going to take a lot of time out of your day to complete. And I think also with the peers and getting your friends involved is very important, because friends mirror after their friends. And so if they're not doing this one thing, then I guess I kind of won't do it either, especially in the high school setting, which I noticed a lot during my school, is kind of following one another. But being able to just get even a couple of young people in your friend group encouraged and kind of just like promoting it. So making sure that other people your age know that this is okay, and making it like a safe space, which I also think schools should make it, like schools should be considered a safe space, especially when you want to talk about voting and getting involved civically, because I know we do a lot of community services and schools promote community service, but I think we should also start just promoting more of the civic service that we do.
Those are all really, really well said points from everybody. Those are honestly amazing. Well done, all of our amazing panelists. And before we open it up to the floor for questions and comments, I would like to ask Uma one last question. So a big part of our Vote for the Greater Good campaign, as well as what 18 by Vote does, is getting young people registered to vote. We would like to pass it over to you so you can go over the basics of registering how to vote.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a tiny presentation. Tarina, would it be possible to let me share my screen?
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
you should have access.
Oh, awesome. Okay, let me know. Oh, whoops. Stop share. I'm gonna make this larger. Present. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. So really, you know, this is pretty nitty-gritty basics, but the basic 4 things you need to vote is you need your personal information, you need your social security number, you need proof of US citizenship, and you can also declare your party when you register to vote. Depends on your state. And of course, again, every single state is different. This is another obstacle that we had been talking about before that people face, because the rules change between states. And if you're going to college in one state and you're going to like then the state that you're actually from, it can become really difficult to like manage. So from there, we have been using quite a few technical platforms while we've been engaging with young people through our Civic Engagement Fellowship. So I'm actually going to turn the mic over to Sydney to talk about SophiaBot and Motivote and her experiences with that for a quick sec. Sydney?
Yeah, so I actually enjoy that this fellowship really encourages social media and the use of social media, especially during the pandemic, because it makes it easier and you can reach a wider audience. And so using SophiaBot, I love it. It's such an easy tool to use that I think it's partnered with Ignite, which I'm also kind of a part of, but it's a super simple tool that you can use and ask you just quick questions, and people who aren't even of the registering age can still use it, and because it gives you options to be like on how to get involved, which is great. So I definitely love this, and it's super quick and easy and just it like kind of fires you up to go out and vote. And with Motivote, I also enjoy that because it's kind of team-based and creating your own team, and it has little incentives as well. So like if you earn points for doing these action items, and you get prizes, which is really cool, and is just a great way to encourage people to kind of like register to vote, tell your other friends to vote, like do these type of things. And they also give you like just updates about when the election is coming and other information that you probably typically wouldn't get, but it's easier to get with using Motivote and SophiaBot. So yeah, I really love it, and I'm glad that it's been implemented in our fellowship.
And I will just tack on one more thing. With Motivote, you can actually win points that can let you win swag and stuff. So it's a really great way to get young people involved in voting, and kind of going back to this idea of like, oh, young people aren't interested to vote. Well, you have to reach young voters where they are. You have to do things that make voting appealing to them and use the systems and the platforms that they use, and not necessarily traditional systems that were not made for younger voters to begin with. So we went over, you know, the basic, like the information that you need, 2 platforms that you can use in order to make voting a lot easier. And you can check out the Sophia bot at 18by.vote/Sophia bot. I'll drop the link in the chat as well. You can check out Motivote and join us on that at bit.ly/18by-Motivote. On top of that, it's also important to notice that there are differences in deadlines to register for your state, and especially as the presidential election is coming up, please, please, please do not miss your deadline to register. A lot of states have different requirements. There are some states, the ones that are in green, that let you register online with some sort of ID, driver's license. Sometimes you can use your social security. It again depends. The states that are in blue are places that rely on paper registration. So if you live in one of those states, I encourage you to go and check out their websites as soon as possible and see if you actually have to mail in something. North Dakota is special. It actually is the only state where you don't need to register. So if you're from there, lucky you, I guess, you get to miss this step of the process. But please, of course, check with your Secretary of State and your local Board of Elections to see your specific needs in this process. That was about registering. The second thing is about voting by mail and absentee. What's really important here is to understand that the deadlines between states, again, for this are different, and there's a difference between having a postmark and a return date. And it's the best advice that I can give to all young voters is to just get your ballot as soon as possible and get it voted and get it in the mail as soon as possible. There are a lot of differences in, you know, like the signing that you need at the back of your envelope. Some states require it, some states don't. Please Google this really, really thoroughly. And if you actually need some help, you can check out 18by.vote because we've got all of this information there for you. And that's really it for us in terms of the more technical things. But this, again, just kind of highlighting back the differences between these states and the differences between what you actually need to do and how to do it are so confusing. And we can streamline it as much as possible, but there does need to be a larger conversation led by youth about making these systems more efficient for all users, including youth voters. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Tarina, is there anything else I need to go over?
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much. And I think what you said was so important in thinking about a lot of this infrastructure. It is confusing, and so streamlining these resources like you all do at 18by-vote is incredible, and making sure that we can really get out that youth vote and make sure that voting is accessible. And kind of on that point, make sure you're also looking at referendums, because a lot of them have to do with election processes, like thinking about gerrymandering and how our districts are drawn, thinking about a lot of different factors like ranked choice voting that make sure that people's voices are heard. And some referendums even look at voting age. So make sure to vote on those as well. Mike, did you want to transition us into the next portion?
Yeah, totally. So right now, we would love to open the floor up to any questions or comments. Tarina and I will be calling on y'all. So if you have anything at all, just please raise your hand or put it in the chat and we'll see it.
Yeah, and feel free to a question to any of our panelists, or also a comment if you want to give a call to action to anybody here, anything like that. You can put it in the chat as well. Olivia, go ahead.
Thank you, Tarina. And also just thank you to our panelists, Adam, Tarina, and Mike as well, for creating this incredible space for dialogue. I'm so appreciative of the insight I'm gaining here, so thanks for being here today. One thing I wanted to ask was sort of a reflection upon what Arthur was saying so wisely before about how the insular nature of school environments can sometimes make it so that civic engagement is a little bit harder to come by for youth to get involved in. But one thing I've personally noticed in my school environments is a different kind of greater good is missed with the very partisan nature of politics in our current era, I found that a lot of times with my peers in conversations about voting and other forms of political engagement, it can be challenging to have people want to stay engaged in that process because the incredibly partisan nature of our political framework at the moment makes it challenging for people to feel like their voices will be truly heard with empathy, and that their opinions will be recognized and regarded as genuine, and essentially that people aren't looking to be divisive just by the nature of having such conversations. And so I was wondering if anyone had any insight into conducting those kind of conversations with peers, kind of breaking down the divisiveness that can come up with having different political opinions, and really understanding that we do have a common good, even if we have different approaches, that oftentimes we do have a common goal of the greater, or trying to promote essentially the greater good for Americans. So I'm curious if anyone has any insight into how to sort of infuse empathy into conversations that might be a little bit politically challenging, to keep the momentum rolling forward and keep young people wanting to stay engaged in these conversations and to want to vote and want to be engaged. So thank you. Yeah, that's my question essentially.
Thank you, Olivia. Do any of our panelists want to take a crack at it?
Well, I'll try. I mean, I think bipartisanship has become much more difficult, and there are many people who have said that the Republican Party now is not what it was years ago, and there's those who would argue that it's been hijacked by Donald Trump, and that once we get past the era of Trump, we'll get back more to the traditional Republican Party, and there will be a desire. I think there's a really latent desire within the country for bipartisan cooperation. And I'm just hoping that we can get beyond this national nightmare, which is what Watergate was called before, and get to a point where we have two or many parties which are very civil in dealing with one another. But right now, I think it's really difficult, and we just have to move on to the next phase.
Absolutely. And I think kind of adding off that point, I think Zidane actually said it so well. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced the name, but both sides of the aisle need to bond over creating a better America. And I think everybody has a why as to what they believe, what is the root of somebody thinking the way they think. And so I think that's why it's so important for us to really get at that why, because, with the polarized world that we have today, we're not able to have the conversations that lead us to solutions, and solutions is what it's all about, right? So if we can't have the conversations, we can't have the solutions. And so everything starts with voting. We're voting for people, we're voting for policies, and we're also voting for attitudes as to who is going to allow us to have those conversations. Kimani, did you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Tarina. And I just want to say thank you to you and Adam for hosting this informative panel discussion today. My question is, how do you ensure that your absentee ballot is counted after you have mailed it to your board of electors?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are some areas where there's a barcode on your envelope, and you can also retain a document which will let you access your election board online and find out whether or not your absentee ballot has actually been received. But it is difficult. It is difficult. And, a lot of people have to make choices. Should I put it in a drop box? Should I put it in a mailbox? Or should I take it directly to the election board?
And kind of just piggybacking off of that, my answer isn't going to, really appease your question, because the answer is really, you can't. I mean, there are some areas where they have like this very refined barcode system, but take for instance the New York primary elections that happened. There was a lot of confusion over which envelope you had to sign. Some people didn't sign their envelopes. Some people had requested mail-in ballots, but then they never received it. And the whole thing was a fiasco that actually led to having, I think it was about 25% of mail-in votes invalidated. So it becomes an issue of, again, understanding. Then, what are all the steps you have to do? Then it also becomes an issue of process. Really telling people what they have to do and creating a process that streamlines all of this for people. There are, though, on more of a like happier side, voter like lookups that you can use for your states, where you can try and track your ballot. But I would really just say that the best advice that you can give is to get your ballot in early. So hopefully it can show up on the voting ballot like a tracker. And if anything, if you have any doubts, call your local BOE, because they should be able to give you an answer.
Thank you so much for that, Uma. Thank you as well, Arthur. I think we have time for one last question before our closing remarks, so I'm going to pass it over to Maya.
Hi. I think you guys talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but I just wanted to ask, as a student, I've heard from many other students who live, I'm from New York State, and so from people who are really in either Democratic or Republican stronghold states in regards to the presidential election, that they feel like they don't need to vote because their vote doesn't matter as much and they already know how their state is going to go. So what would you say to those voters to encourage them to vote?
Well, I know that Greater Good Initiative is involved a lot in you know, letter, email campaigns, whatever. I would say this. I'm going to name some people for you: Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, Jimmy Carter. These are all people who have run for president or previously run, and they're not going to do it again. I would love to hear them come out uniformly saying we need to get rid of the electoral college. I don't know what that background noise is. We need to get rid of the electoral college. We need to get rid of the primary system that we have, where the first two states are each over 90% white. These are people, as I said, Obama, Clinton, the Clintons, and others who have nothing to lose. They were able to play the game well. But, you know, if we want voters in New York or Missouri or Mississippi or California to feel that their vote really does count, we've got to get to a popular vote. And I think, you know, that has to become an issue which is front and center with the American people. And there are some people who can really help us do that, and they're not doing it yet.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to everyone that left a message in the chat or asked a question here. We are so incredibly grateful for everyone that has joined us here today. It has been really amazing having everyone here, and we would just like to talk briefly for a second about some of the exciting things that are going to be happening with the Vote for the Greater Good campaign. So we are holding voter registration office hours. Tarina, if you wouldn't mind dropping it into the chat, it's bit.ly/V4GG vote. And you can sign up for voter registration hours, where you can join a member of the Greater Good Initiative team, and they will hop on a 15 to 30 minute Zoom call with you, go through the entire process of registering to vote, requesting an absentee ballot, helping you identify exactly who and what is going to be on your ballot. And if you, align with a specific party, they can help you out in that regard and help you figure out exactly who you should be voting for and what you probably would like to be voting for. We are also going to be holding some more virtual events throughout our campaign. We have 5 sectors of policy with GGI: civil rights, education, economic, environmental, and public health. And we're going to be hosting some virtual events to sort of talk about what are some of the big issues in regards to policy regarding these specific issues. So if you're interested in one of those 5 sectors of policy that I mentioned earlier, you are welcome to hop onto one of those webinars, and we can join in that conversation about some of the big issues, where our presidential candidates stand on those issues, and going from there. We, like I said, we are so excited that you guys have all joined us today. We are so grateful, and we are excited for you guys to continue joining us with the campaign. You can follow us on all of our social media at the Greater Good Initiative on most platforms. Facebook and Instagram, we are very active on. You can also check out our website, thegreatergoodinitiative.com. And yeah, I'm going to pass it over to Tarina for just some final closing remarks.
Yes, hi everyone. So thank you all for joining us today. We are so excited that we were able to have this incredible conversation about what it means to be a young person voting, what it means to vote in general, and the power that we all have. I just wanted to end by saying every single one of us has our own civic superpower. So there are many communities that unfortunately don't have the ability to vote in our country right now, which is why for all of us that do, it's vital now more than ever that we use that civic superpower, that we continue to mobilize, that we continue to activate, and that we continue to reach out. It's all about bringing people in to this greater idea, this great experiment that is our democracy. And we know from many angles, our democracy might not be working the way it should, but it is our job as citizens, as people, as human beings living in this country to vote, to use that civic duty to create a democracy that functions just a little bit better. And so we really hope that you join us for future events for Vote for the Greater Good. We'll be coming in with a lot of different events, some including legislators, as well as some other really incredible stuff. So please follow along on our Instagram, website, all of our social media. Please make sure to check out 18 by Vote as well as Civitas, making sure that you see all of their incredible work, that we were so excited to have them. And thank you all so much for being here. Please get out to the polls and vote. Tell your mom, tell your dad, tell your grandparents, tell your uncle, tell your acquaintance in Zoom class, private message them and say, hey, make sure you're registered to vote. Whatever it is, make sure that you are getting out to the polls. So
Very last thing before we go, for Arthur or for Uma and Sydney, do you guys have anything that you would like to plug regarding the work that Civitas or 18 by Vote are doing?
That's very kind of you. We are, as with so many other people, really kind of struggling as to how to adapt in the era of Zoom. But we have worked a lot over the past summer with interns on what is the nature of people who don't vote. This is more adult than young people, but we want to focus now more on young people and what can be done to try to get them to vote. We've had a couple of focus groups, and I want to say, something again, I've said it before, that it's amazing how many people will tell you they will not vote because they don't think their vote counts because of the Electoral College. So, I would just urge to a Greater Good Initiative and for Civitas as well, that if we want democracy to work, that is the #1 roadblock to it. And we really need to work on that issue.
Absolutely. And I mean, that is a larger conversation, Arthur, that everyone needs to be having. And I'm really excited to see how the Greater Good Initiative and Civitas continues in their mission and following your journey. I will just spotlight very quickly that 18by.vote has launched our inaugural fellowship, Civic Engagement Fellowship, and Sydney is one of our members. We have 22 fellows across 11 different states, and we're really utilizing this idea of relational organizing and having young people talk to young people about voting in order to get the vote and the word out. Please feel free to follow us at 18by.vote on Instagram, Facebook, and then at 18by.vote on Twitter to follow our fellows and see what they're doing. We've got some very exciting things in the pipeline with young people who might be from your local community, who are of ages that you can definitely relate to, and just see how young people are really reclaiming their power and their voice in voting.
Wonderful. And with that, have a wonderful rest of your day. You can message us on any of these platforms, any of our organizations, if you have any lingering questions, ideas, thoughts, concerns. But have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.